The heavy wooden doors of St. Michael's Cathedral slammed shut in my face with a sound that echoed through the empty parking lot. My own family had just barricaded me out of my grandfather's funeral. I stood there in my black dress, clutching the folded American flag that had covered his casket during his military service, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. What I didn't know was that in exactly 37 minutes, 20 police officers would march through those same doors and change everything forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and 3 days ago, I received the call that would shatter my world. My grandfather, Colonel William Bill Henderson, had passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89. Bill wasn't just my grandfather, he was my hero, my mentor, and the only person in my family who truly understood me. Growing up in the small town of Millbrook, Ohio, I was always the black sheep. While my cousins Emma and Jake spent their summers at country club pools, I was learning to change oil filters in Bill's garage. While they complained about having to visit museums on family trips, I sat captivated as Bill recounted stories from his 3 tours in Vietnam, his voice never wavering despite the pain I could see flickering behind his weathered blue eyes. Bill had enlisted in the Army at 19, straight out of high school. He served with distinction, earning a Purple Heart after taking shrapnel in his left shoulder during the Battle of Khe Sanh. When he returned home, he married my grandmother Sarah, started a small auto repair shop, and raised 4 children, including my mother Patricia. But Bill's relationship with his own family was complicated. My mother and her siblings, Uncle Robert, Uncle Charles, and Aunt Margaret, had always resented what they called his military obsession. They grew up feeling like they competed with his war stories, his veteran friends, and his unwavering dedication to serving his community. After Sarah passed away 12 years ago, the distance between Bill and his children only widened. That's when I stepped in. Fresh out of college with a degree in social work, I was struggling to find my place in the world. My mother constantly criticized my career choice, calling it bleeding heart nonsense, and pressuring me to follow my cousin Emma into real estate. But Bill saw something different in me. He saw potential. Every Sunday for the past 8 years, I drove the 43 miles from my apartment in Columbus to Bill's modest ranch house on Maple Street. We'd sit on his front porch, drinking coffee from his collection of military-themed mugs, and he'd share stories I'd never heard before. Stories about the friends he'd lost, the villages he'd helped rebuild, the letters he'd written to families of fallen soldiers. But Bill wasn't just living in the past. He was actively involved in the present. He volunteered at the local VA hospital, spending countless hours with younger veterans who were struggling with PTSD and adjustment disorders. He organized annual fundraisers for Gold Star families, personally delivering checks to widows and children of servicemen who'd made the ultimate sacrifice. Most importantly, Bill became my mentor in ways I never expected. He saw my passion for helping others and encouraged me to specialize in trauma counseling for veterans. With his connections and guidance, I landed a position at the Columbus VA Medical Center, where I'd been working for the past 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Bill's own children had grown distant, he'd found a kindred spirit in his granddaughter. I understood his sense of duty, his need to serve others, his inability to walk away from someone in need. My mother called it enabling, but I called it compassion. 3 months ago, Bill's health began declining rapidly. The doctors said it was his heart. Decades of carrying emotional burdens had finally taken their physical toll. During his final weeks, I took family leave from work to care for him full-time. I moved into his guest bedroom, arranged his medications, drove him to appointments, and made sure he wasn't alone. My mother visited twice during those 3 months. My uncles and aunt called occasionally, but their conversations were always brief and focused on practical matters, insurance policies, property deeds, and funeral arrangements. None of them seemed interested in simply spending time with a dying man who devoted his life to serving others. On Bill's final day, I held his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. His last coherent words were about a lockbox in his bedroom closet, containing documents he wanted me to have. He made me promise to continue his work with veterans, to never let anyone convince me that caring for others was a weakness. After he passed, I called my mother to share the news. Her response was clinical, almost businesslike. She immediately launched into logistics, funeral arrangements, estate matters, and family notifications. When I mentioned Bill's request about the lockbox, she cut me off sharply. "Rebecca, you need to understand something," she said, her voice cold. "Your grandfather may have favored you, but you're not his next of kin. Robert is the oldest son, and he'll be handling all arrangements. Your job is to grieve quietly and let the adults handle the important decisions." The next morning, I arrived at Bill's house to find Uncle Robert and Uncle Charles loading boxes into a moving truck. They changed the locks overnight and informed me that I was no longer welcome on the property. When I asked about the lockbox Bill had mentioned, Robert dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "There's no lockbox, Rebecca. Your grandfather was confused at the end. Sometimes dying people imagine things." But I could see the lie in his eyes, the way he avoided looking directly at me. The funeral arrangements were made without any input from me. Despite being the person who'd cared for Bill during his final months, I wasn't consulted about the service, the flowers, or even the obituary. When I called the funeral home to ask about participating in the ceremony, the director seemed confused. "I'm sorry, Miss Martinez, but I've been instructed that you're not part of the immediate family arrangements. Your Uncle Robert specifically requested that all communications go through him." I spent the next 2 days in a fog of grief and disbelief. How had I gone from being Bill's closest companion to being excluded from his final farewell? The injustice of it consumed me, but I was determined to pay my respects regardless of my family's wishes. On the morning of the funeral, I dressed carefully in a black dress that Bill had complimented once, saying it made me look professional and dignified. I drove to St. Michael's Cathedral, where 3 generations of Hendersons had held their most important ceremonies. The parking lot was already full, with cars I recognized belonging to Bill's veteran friends, neighbors, and people from his volunteer work. As I walked toward the entrance, I noticed Uncle Robert standing near the doors, talking intensely with 2 men I didn't recognize. When he saw me approaching, his expression hardened. "Rebecca, you shouldn't be here," he said, stepping directly into my path. "This is my grandfather's funeral," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have every right to be here." "Actually, you don't," said one of the men Robert had been talking to. He was tall, probably in his 50s, with the kind of stern expression that suggested he wasn't used to being challenged. "I'm attorney David Carlson, representing the Henderson family. You've been asked to respect the family's wishes for privacy during this difficult time." I stared at him in disbelief. "Privacy? From his own granddaughter?" "You're not acting like family," interjected Aunt Margaret, who'd apparently been waiting inside. "You're acting like some kind of opportunist who thinks she can waltz in here and claim inheritance rights." "Inheritance rights?" I was genuinely confused. "I just want to say goodbye to my grandfather." "Save the act," snapped Uncle Charles, joining the growing circle of hostility. "We know you were manipulating him in his final months, isolating him from his real family, probably influencing him to change his will." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I cared for him because I loved him. I never asked for anything. "Then you won't mind leaving peacefully," said the attorney. "The family has made their decision." I looked around at the faces surrounding me, my mother, my uncles, my aunt, and the attorney they'd hired to keep me away. Behind them, I could see the cathedral doors, beyond which lay my grandfather's casket and the chance to say a proper goodbye. "I'm not leaving," I said quietly. Robert's face flushed red. "Then we'll have you removed." "On what grounds?" "Trespassing," the attorney said smoothly. "This is a private family service on private property. The family has the right to exclude anyone they choose." I stood there for a moment, weighing my options. I could cause a scene, force them to physically remove me, and probably end up arrested on the day of Bill's funeral. Or I could walk away with whatever dignity I had left. But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. Through the cathedral's stained glass windows, I could see the honor guard preparing to present the flag that had covered Bill's casket. It was a ceremony I'd seen him perform dozens of times for other veterans, a ritual he described as sacred. Except the flag they were holding wasn't the one that had covered his casket during his military service. It was a brand new flag, still creased from the box. The real flag, the one that had been draped over his casket during his funeral at Arlington National Cemetery honors ceremony 3 days earlier, was sitting in my car, where I'd placed it after Bill's attorney had given it to me per his written instructions. My family didn't just want to exclude me from the funeral. They wanted to erase the evidence that Bill had chosen me as his military beneficiary, the person he'd trusted with his most precious possessions. As the cathedral doors swung shut behind me, I realized this wasn't just about a funeral anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that would honor Bill's memory in ways my family couldn't imagine. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I walked back to my car, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. The first call I made was to Detective Maria Santos at the Millbrook Police Department. She'd been one of Bill's closest friends, a fellow veteran who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the force. "Maria, it's Rebecca Martinez. I need your help." "Rebecca, honey, I'm so sorry about Bill. I was planning to attend the service, but I got called into work. How are you holding up?" "They won't let me into the funeral," I said. And then the whole story came pouring out. The changed locks, the missing lockbox, the accusations, and the attorney. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Maria spoke again, her voice had changed from sympathetic to professional. "Rebecca, are you absolutely certain about the lockbox? He told me exactly where it was. He made me promise to get it after he passed. And you're sure your family has it? I saw them loading boxes from his bedroom. They changed the locks specifically to keep me out." Another pause. "Rebecca, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't leave the parking lot. I'm making some calls." As I waited, I thought about Bill's final words, about his request that I continue his work with veterans. Sitting in my car outside his funeral, excluded by the very family he'd supported his entire life, I finally understood what he'd been trying to tell me. This wasn't about me. It was about ensuring that his legacy of service continued, that his commitment to helping others wouldn't die with him. And if my family thought they could silence that legacy by keeping me away from his funeral, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Because in 23 minutes, Detective Maria Santos would arrive with 19 other officers, and everything would change forever. 23 minutes after my phone call with Detective Santos, I watched her unmarked police cruiser pull into the cathedral parking lot. She wasn't alone. Behind her came a convoy of patrol cars, their presence commanding immediate attention from the handful of mourners who'd stepped outside during the service. Maria Santos was a woman who commanded respect without demanding it. At 38, she'd risen through the ranks of the Millbrook Police Department faster than any officer in the department's history. Her military background, 2 tours in Afghanistan as a military police officer, had prepared her for situations that required both tactical thinking and diplomatic finesse. As she approached my car, I noticed she was carrying a manila folder and wearing her dress uniform instead of her usual detective attire. The significance of this choice wouldn't become clear until later, but it was the first sign that something much larger was unfolding. "Rebecca," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to taking charge, "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened with your grandfather's personal effects." I explained about the lockbox, the changed locks, and my family's denial of its existence. As I spoke, Maria took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification about dates and specific conversations. "Your grandfather mentioned this lockbox to anyone else?" she asked. "Dr. Patricia Yamamoto, his VA psychiatrist. She was helping him organize his affairs. He also mentioned it to Father Miguel Rodriguez at the parish. Bill had been working with him on some kind of veteran outreach program." Maria's expression grew more serious. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something and I want you to think carefully before answering. Did your grandfather ever mention anything about missing funds from the veteran fundraisers he organized?" The question caught me off guard. "Missing funds? No, never. Why?" "Because 3 weeks ago, your Uncle Robert filed a complaint with the district attorney's office claiming that your grandfather had been embezzling money from veteran charities. He alleged that you were involved and that you'd been manipulating your grandfather to gain access to these funds. The accusation was so absurd that I actually laughed. That's impossible. Bill was the most honest person I've ever known. He barely kept enough money to pay his own bills. He gave everything to help other veterans. I know, Maria said quietly. I've been investigating the complaint, and that's exactly what I found. Your grandfather's financial records are immaculate. Every penny raised for veterans' causes went exactly where it was supposed to go. In fact, he often supplemented the fundraisers with his own money when donations fell short. She opened the manila folder and showed me a series of bank statements and financial documents. What I discovered is that your grandfather maintained meticulous records of every transaction. He documented every donation, every expense, every distribution. He also kept detailed correspondence with the families who received assistance. As I scanned the documents, Maria continued her explanation. But here's what's interesting, and what your family doesn't know yet. 3 days before your grandfather passed away, he called me to his house. He was concerned that someone had been asking questions about the veteran funds, making insinuations about improper handling of money. Who was asking questions? Your Uncle Robert. Apparently, he'd been contacting some of the veteran families your grandfather helped, asking about payments they'd received. Bill was worried that Robert was building a case to challenge his reputation posthumously. The pieces were starting to fall into place. So Robert filed the complaint to discredit Bill before he died? It appears that way. But your grandfather was prepared for this possibility. He gave me a key to a safety deposit box at First National Bank. He said if anything happened to him, and if his family tried to prevent you from accessing his personal effects, I should retrieve the contents and ensure they reached you. Maria reached into her jacket and pulled out a small envelope. This morning, after your call, I went to the bank. Rebecca, your grandfather left you more than just personal mementos. She handed me the envelope and I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter written in Bill's distinctive handwriting, along with several legal documents. The letter was dated just 5 days before his death. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then my fears about my family's intentions have proven justified. I've spent the last several weeks putting my affairs in order, not because I was ready to die, but because I was determined to protect the work we've built together. You are the only person who understood my commitment to serving others. You are the only one who saw that helping veterans wasn't a hobby or an obsession. It was a calling. That's why I've made arrangements to ensure our work continues. The documents with this letter establish the William Henderson Veterans Foundation, with you as the sole trustee. The foundation has been funded with my entire estate, minus small bequests to your mother and her siblings. This includes the house on Maple Street, which will serve as the foundation headquarters. I've also documented every instance of harassment and interference from Robert, Charles, and Margaret. They've been working for months to undermine our veteran programs, believing they could claim my assets if they could prove mismanagement. The evidence in the safety deposit box will clear your name of any wrongdoing and expose their attempts to discredit our work. More importantly, it will ensure that the veterans we serve continue to receive the support they deserve. I know this burden is heavy, but I also know you're strong enough to carry it. Continue the work, Rebecca. Make sure they're never forgotten. Diesta. With all my love and respect, Grandpa Bill. P.S. The lockbox they took from my bedroom contains the financial records they're trying to hide. Maria knows where to find it. As I finished reading, tears streamed down my face. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of determination. Bill had anticipated his family's actions and had taken steps to protect both his legacy and my future. There's more, Maria said gently. The safety deposit box contained copies of all the documents your family removed from the house. Bank records, correspondence with veteran families, documentation of every charitable contribution. It also contained evidence of your uncle's attempts to intimidate the families Bill helped. She showed me a series of recorded phone calls and written statements. Robert had been contacting Gold Star families, telling them that their financial assistance might be recalled if they didn't cooperate with his investigation into your grandfather's handling of funds. He was essentially threatening widows and orphans to support his false claims. The cruelty of it was staggering. Why would he do this? Money, Maria said simply. He believed your grandfather had a significant estate, and he wanted to ensure it went to the legal heirs rather than to charity. What he didn't realize is that your grandfather had already restructured his assets to fund the foundation. Just then, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice shrill with panic. "Rebecca, where are you? We need to talk immediately." "I'm in the parking lot where you left me," I said coldly. "Don't be smart with me. Robert just got a call from some lawyer about estate matters. You need to come inside and explain what you've done." "I haven't done anything except honor Grandpa's wishes." "His wishes?" My mother's voice rose to a near scream. "His wishes were manipulated by you. You took advantage of a sick old man." "Patricia," I said, deliberately using her first name instead of Mom, "I think you need to speak with your attorney about the legal documents that were filed 3 weeks ago. The ones that established the William Henderson Veterans Foundation." There was dead silence on the other end of the phone. Then, in a voice I'd never heard before, my mother whispered, "What foundation?" "The one that received Grandpa's entire estate, the one that I'm legally obligated to manage according to his written instructions." The phone went dead. Through the cathedral windows, I could see commotion inside as my family huddled together in urgent conversation. The attorney they'd hired was gesturing frantically, clearly trying to process this new information. "They're going to fight this," I told Maria. "Let them," she replied. "Your grandfather's legal preparations were thorough. He worked with 3 different attorneys to ensure everything was properly documented and legally sound. He also arranged for character witnesses, people who can testify to his mental competence and your genuine care for him." As we talked, more people began arriving in the parking lot. I recognized several faces from Bill's volunteer work: veterans he'd helped, family members who'd benefited from his fundraising efforts, and staff from the VA hospital where he'd volunteered. "Maria," I said, "how did all these people know to come here?" She smiled for the first time since arriving. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions about his funeral. He wanted it to be a celebration of service, not a private family affair. He asked me to ensure that everyone whose life he'd touched had the opportunity to pay their respects, but my family planned a private service." They planned what they thought was a private service. They didn't realize that your grandfather had been making his own arrangements with Father Rodriguez. The service they're holding inside is the family's version. The real memorial service, the one Bill actually planned, starts in about 10 minutes. She pointed toward the side entrance of the cathedral, where Father Rodriguez was emerging with several other clergy members. Behind them came a procession of veterans in dress uniform, many carrying flags and military honors. "Rebecca," Maria said, "your grandfather left one final instruction. He wanted you to present the flag that covered his casket to the newest member of the Foundation's board of directors." "Who's the newest member?" "Sergeant First Class David Chen. He's a Purple Heart recipient who's been struggling with PTSD and unemployment since returning from his 3rd deployment. Your grandfather had been working with him for months, helping him access VA benefits and find stable housing." She gestured toward a young man in dress blues, who was approaching us. Despite his military bearing, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the look of someone who'd been fighting battles both overseas and at home. "Sergeant Chen," Maria called out, "I'd like you to meet Rebecca Martinez, the new director of the William Henderson Veterans Foundation." As we shook hands, I realized that this moment represented everything Bill had been trying to teach me. Service wasn't about recognition or family approval. It was about showing up for people when they needed support most. "Ms. Martinez," Sergeant Chen said, "Colonel Henderson changed my life. When I came home, I was ready to give up. I had no job, no place to live, and no hope. He didn't just help me access my benefits. He helped me remember why I served in the first place." Behind him, I could see a growing crowd of people with similar stories. Veterans who'd found housing through Bill's programs, widows who'd received financial assistance, children who'd been able to attend college because of scholarship funds he'd organized. "Are you ready?" Maria asked. I looked back at the cathedral doors, where my family was undoubtedly still trying to process the legal ramifications of Bill's final arrangements. Then I looked at the crowd of people who'd come to honor a man who'd spent his life serving others. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." As we walked toward the side entrance, I realized that Bill's real funeral was just beginning. And unlike the private service my family had planned, this celebration would be everything he'd wanted, a gathering of people whose lives had been touched by his commitment to service. The 20 officers who'd arrived with Maria were already taking their positions for the honor guard ceremony. Among them were veterans from multiple conflicts, active duty personnel, and retired officers who'd served alongside Bill in various capacities. But the most important person in that honor guard was me, Bill's granddaughter, carrying the flag that had covered his casket, ready to continue the work he'd started. My family might have locked me out of their version of his funeral, but they couldn't lock me out of his legacy. And in a few minutes, when those 20 officers marched into the cathedral and saluted the woman they'd excluded, everyone would understand exactly what Bill Henderson had been trying to accomplish. Father Miguel Rodriguez stood at the side entrance of St. Michael's Cathedral, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the growing crowd in the parking lot. At 62, he'd officiated hundreds of funerals, but none quite like this one. The dichotomy was striking. Inside the cathedral, a small, tense family gathering was proceeding with their private service, while outside, nearly 200 people had assembled for what Bill Henderson had called his real farewell. "Ms. Martinez," Father Rodriguez said as I approached, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who'd spent decades counseling families through their darkest moments. "Your grandfather spent considerable time planning this day. He was very specific about how he wanted his life to be celebrated." He gestured toward the assembled crowd, and I began to truly comprehend the scope of Bill's impact. There were elderly veterans from Korea and Vietnam, their service medals gleaming in the afternoon sun. Middle-aged men and women who'd served in the Gulf War stood alongside young veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. But it wasn't just military personnel. There were families with children, elderly couples, and people from every walk of life. "Who are all these people?" I asked. "Lives your grandfather touched," Father Rodriguez replied. "That woman there, Teresa Gonzalez. Her husband died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. She was facing eviction with her 2 young children when your grandfather stepped in. He helped her navigate the VA survivor benefits system and connected her with job training programs. She's now a certified nursing assistant supporting her family." He pointed to another group. "Those 3 young men served together in Iraq. They came home with invisible wounds, struggling with addiction and homelessness. Your grandfather didn't just help them access treatment. He created a support network that meets every week. They call themselves Henderson's Heroes." As Father Rodriguez continued identifying people in the crowd, I realized that Bill's influence extended far beyond the formal programs he'd established. He'd created an entire community of people committed to supporting each other. "The family inside doesn't know about any of this," I said. "Your grandfather was very aware of that," Father Rodriguez replied. He often spoke about the disconnection between his military service and his children's understanding of that service. He worried that they saw his commitment to veterans as a rejection of them, rather than an extension of the values he'd tried to instill. Detective Santos appeared at my elbow, her expression more serious than before. "Rebecca, we need to talk privately for a moment." She led me away from the crowd, toward a cluster of oak trees at the edge of the parking lot. "I just got off the phone with District Attorney Jennifer Walsh. She's been reviewing the complaint your Uncle Robert filed, and she wants to meet with you tomorrow morning." "Am I in trouble?" "No, but Robert might be." Filing false reports is a serious offense, especially when it involves defaming a deceased veteran. The DA is considering charges for fraud and harassment of Gold Star families. Maria pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages. These are from some of the families Robert contacted. He told them that their financial assistance from your grandfather's fundraisers was quote, under investigation, and that they might be required to return the money if they didn't cooperate with his inquiry. Reading the messages made my stomach turn. Robert had targeted the most vulnerable people: widows struggling to pay rent, disabled veterans facing medical bills, and families trying to keep their children in school after losing their primary breadwinner. "There's something else," Maria continued. "When I executed the search warrant on your grandfather's house this morning, we found the lockbox your family claimed didn't exist. It was hidden in Robert's car trunk. What was in it? Evidence that Robert has been stealing from your grandfather for months. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, forged checks, and documentation of Robert pressuring your grandfather to change his will. Your grandfather had been building a case against him." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Bill knew Robert was stealing from him? He suspected it for weeks. That's why he moved so quickly to establish the foundation and transfer his assets. He was protecting his legacy from his own son. As we walked back toward the cathedral, I noticed that the crowd outside had grown even larger. News vans from local television stations were setting up equipment, and I could see reporters interviewing some of the veterans who'd come to pay their respects. "This is going to be a media circus," I said. "Your grandfather anticipated that too," Maria replied. "He left instructions for handling media attention. He wanted the focus to be on the veterans' stories, not on family drama." Just then, a commotion erupted near the cathedral's main entrance. Uncle Robert had emerged from the building, his face flushed with anger, followed by the attorney he'd hired and several other family members. "This is harassment," Robert shouted, pointing at the crowd. "You people have no right to be here." An elderly man in a Vietnam veteran's cap stepped forward. I recognized him as Frank Morrison, one of Bill's closest friends from the VA hospital volunteer program. "Son," Frank said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd seen real conflict. "We're here to honor a man who dedicated his life to serving others. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to leave." "This is a private family matter," Robert shot back. "My father's funeral is not a public spectacle." "Your father's funeral ended the moment you locked his granddaughter out of the building," said another voice. I turned to see Sergeant Chen approaching, flanked by a dozen other veterans in dress uniform. "And who the hell are you?" Robert demanded. "Sergeant First Class David Chen, United States Army. Your father saved my life when I came home from Afghanistan. He found me sleeping in my car outside the VA hospital, helped me get housing, connected me with mental health services, and gave me a reason to keep living." More veterans stepped forward, each sharing brief testimonies about Bill's impact on their lives. The contrast was stark. Inside the cathedral, a handful of family members were conducting a sterile, formal service, while outside, hundreds of people were celebrating a life of genuine service and sacrifice. "This is ridiculous," Robert sputtered. "You people are being manipulated by my niece. She's trying to steal my father's estate by turning you against his real family." "Actually," came a new voice, "she's trying to honor his wishes." Everyone turned to see a distinguished woman in a navy blue suit approaching the group. She was tall, probably in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that suggested she was accustomed to being heard. "I'm attorney Sarah Mitchell," she announced. "I represent the William Henderson Veterans Foundation. I also helped Colonel Henderson establish the foundation and draft his final will." Robert's face went pale. "I don't know what kind of con game you're running, but—" "Mr. Henderson," Attorney Mitchell interrupted, "I need to inform you that you're currently in violation of several court orders. First, you're in possession of documents that belong to the foundation. Second, you've been harassing beneficiaries of the foundation's programs. Third, you've filed false reports with law enforcement." She pulled out a manila folder and handed Robert a series of legal documents. "These are cease and desist orders, along with notice that the foundation is pursuing criminal charges for theft and fraud." As Robert frantically scanned the documents, Attorney Mitchell continued, "Your father was very thorough in documenting your attempts to undermine his charitable work. He has recordings of conversations where you threatened to, quote, shut down his veteran obsession if he didn't leave his money to family where it belongs." "He was manipulated by her," Robert said, pointing at me. "She isolated him from his family and influenced him to change his will." "Mr. Henderson," Attorney Mitchell said calmly, "your father underwent extensive psychological evaluation to ensure his mental competency when he established the foundation. Dr. Patricia Yamamoto, his VA psychiatrist, conducted multiple assessments confirming his sound mind and clear intentions." She gestured toward the crowd of veterans. "Furthermore, your father's decision to create the foundation was witnessed by dozens of people who can testify to his genuine commitment to veteran welfare. This wasn't the decision of a confused elderly man. It was the culmination of a lifetime of service." Just then, Father Rodriguez appeared at the main entrance of the cathedral. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we're ready to begin the memorial service for Colonel William Henderson." The crowd began moving toward the side entrance, but Robert stepped forward to block their path. "You're not going into that church," he declared. "This is a private family service." "Actually," Father Rodriguez said gently, "this is a public memorial service that Colonel Henderson arranged and paid for separately. The private family service concluded 20 minutes ago." Robert looked confused. "What are you talking about?" "Your father made arrangements for 2 services," Father Rodriguez explained. "The private service you just attended was for immediate family only. This service is for everyone whose life he touched through his work with veterans." "That's impossible," Aunt Margaret interjected. "We would have known about it." "Your father was very specific about keeping the arrangements separate," Father Rodriguez replied. "He was concerned about potential conflicts between family members and the veteran community he served." As the crowd began filing into the cathedral through the side entrance, I noticed that the 20 officers Detective Santos had brought were taking their positions for the honor guard ceremony. They formed 2 lines leading up to the altar, creating a pathway for the flag presentation. "Rebecca," Maria said, "it's time." I looked back at my family, who were huddled together in urgent conversation with their attorney. They'd spent so much energy trying to control Bill's funeral that they'd missed the real celebration of his life. As I walked between the lines of uniformed officers, carrying the flag that had covered Bill's casket, I realized that this moment represented everything he'd tried to teach me about service. It wasn't about recognition or family approval. It was about showing up for people who needed support. The cathedral was packed with people sharing stories, offering comfort to each other, and celebrating a life well lived. Children who'd received scholarships from Bill's programs sat next to elderly veterans who'd found housing through his efforts. Gold Star families who'd received financial assistance were embracing active-duty military personnel who'd benefited from his mentorship. This was Bill's real legacy, not the bitter family conflict over inheritance, but the community of people committed to supporting each other through difficult times. As Father Rodriguez began the service, I took my place in the front row, surrounded by the veterans who'd become my extended family. Behind me, I could hear my mother and uncles arguing in whispers about legal strategies and asset protection. But their voices faded as the honor guard began their ceremony. 20 officers, representing every branch of the military and multiple generations of service, stood at attention as the flag was presented to the William Henderson Veterans Foundation. This was the moment Bill had planned for. Not just the formal recognition of his military service, but the public acknowledgement that his work with veterans would continue long after his death. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, I realized that the real test was just beginning. I had a foundation to run, veterans to serve, and a family that would probably never forgive me for carrying out Bill's wishes. But, looking at the faces of the people who'd come to honor him, I knew that Bill had prepared me for this challenge. He'd taught me that true service requires sacrifice, that doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought after the war is over. 2 years had passed since that transformative day at St. Michael's Cathedral, and I found myself standing before the United States House of Representatives Subcommittee on Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C. The mahogany-paneled room was intimidating, filled with congressional staff, policy experts, and veteran advocates from across the nation. I was there to testify about the William Henderson Veterans Foundation model and its potential for federal adoption. "Ms. Martinez," said Congressman Bradley Thompson, the subcommittee chairman, "your foundation has achieved remarkable results in Ohio. Can you explain how this success could be replicated nationally?" I looked down at my prepared testimony, then set it aside. Instead, I told them about Bill, about a man who'd served his country in uniform and continued serving long after he'd hung up his dog tags. I told them about the veterans sleeping in cars outside VA hospitals, about Gold Star families facing eviction, about young service members returning home to find that civilian life offered no clear mission or purpose. The Henderson model works because it treats veterans as resources, not just recipients, I explained. Every person we help becomes part of our network of helpers. Sergeant Chen, who once slept in his car outside the VA hospital, now runs our PTSD support programs. Elena Vasquez, whose husband died in Afghanistan, coordinates our Gold Star Family Assistance. We don't just solve problems, we build communities. The testimony marked a pivotal moment in our foundation's evolution. What had begun as one grandfather's commitment to helping fellow veterans was now being considered as a template for national policy. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had tried to silence Bill's legacy was about to see it enshrined in federal law. After the hearing, I walked through Arlington National Cemetery, searching for perspective among the white headstones that stretched endlessly across the rolling hills. Each marker represented someone like Bill, a person who'd answered their country's call and made the ultimate commitment to something larger than themselves. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos. Foundation headquarters flooded. Main water pipe burst. Need you back ASAP. The flight back to Columbus was turbulent, matching my emotional state. Just as everything seemed to be falling into place, congressional recognition, federal funding possibilities, expansion into 12 states, we were facing a crisis that could shut down our operations for months. I arrived at 1247 Maple Street to find controlled chaos. Water had damaged most of the first floor, destroying files, computers, and counseling materials. The workshop where veterans learned job skills was ankle-deep in murky water. The group therapy room where so many healing conversations had taken place was uninhabitable. "How bad is it?" I asked Maria, who was coordinating with insurance adjusters and restoration specialists. "Bad enough," she replied grimly. "We're looking at least 3 months before the building is functional again. The real problem is that we have nowhere to relocate our programs temporarily." As we surveyed the damage, veterans began arriving for their scheduled appointments and support group meetings. Word of the flood had spread quickly through our network, and instead of staying away, people were showing up to help. Sergeant Chen arrived with a pickup truck full of shop vacuums and fans borrowed from hardware stores across town. Teresa Gonzalez, the Gold Star mother whose family we'd helped years earlier, brought industrial cleaning supplies and a crew of volunteers from her nursing assistant program. Frank Morrison, Bill's old friend from the VA hospital, showed up with coffee and sandwiches for everyone working on the cleanup. "This is what your grandfather built," Maria said, watching the spontaneous mobilization of support. "Not just a foundation, but a family." The next several hours revealed the true strength of our community. Local businesses donated equipment and supplies. Veterans who'd received assistance from the foundation worked alongside current clients to salvage what could be saved. Even some people I didn't recognize joined the effort, neighbors who'd heard about our work and wanted to help. As evening approached, an unexpected visitor arrived. Patricia Martinez, my mother, stood in the doorway carrying boxes of cleaning supplies and wearing work clothes I'd never seen before. "I thought you might need help," she said simply. We'd maintained cautious contact over the past 2 years, but our relationship remained complicated. Seeing her there, ready to roll up her sleeves and work alongside the people she'd once viewed with suspicion, represented a breakthrough I hadn't dared hope for. "Mom," I said, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "Your grandfather would have been here if he could. This is what family does." Working side by side with my mother and the extended veteran family we'd built, I began to understand something Bill had tried to teach me years earlier. True legacy isn't about monuments or recognition. It's about creating something that can survive and thrive, even when faced with unexpected challenges. By midnight, we'd salvaged most of the essential records and equipment. The building was uninhabitable, but our programs wouldn't miss a beat. 3 different churches had offered temporary meeting spaces. The VA hospital provided office space for administrative functions. A local community college donated classroom space for job training programs. "Where are we going to hold the annual memorial service next month?" asked Sergeant Chen as we finished loading the last of the salvaged materials. I looked around at the water-damaged headquarters that had been Bill's home and our foundation's heart. "Right here," I said, "in the backyard where he used to work on cars and tell stories about service." The 3rd annual William Henderson Memorial Service was unlike anything we'd organized before. Instead of the formal cathedral setting, we created an outdoor celebration on the grounds of the damaged headquarters. Local businesses donated tents, sound equipment, and seating. Veterans groups from across Ohio contributed food and decorations. More than 1,500 people attended, including congressional representatives, state officials, and delegations from other states interested in replicating our model. But the most meaningful moments came from the personal testimonies of people whose lives had been touched by Bill's legacy. Captain Jennifer Walsh, an Army nurse who'd served 3 tours in Iraq, spoke about the transition assistance program that had helped her navigate civilian healthcare career. Her voice broke as she described how close she'd come to suicide before finding support through our network. "I thought coming home from war meant my service was over," she said. "The Henderson Foundation taught me that service never ends, it just changes form." Master Sergeant Robert Kim, a Korean War veteran in his 80s, hobbled to the microphone with his walker. He'd been homeless for 6 months before our housing assistance program helped him find stable shelter. "Colonel Henderson never met me," he said in a voice weathered by age and experience. "But his granddaughter treated me like I was her own grandfather." That's the kind of legacy that matters, teaching young people to care for old soldiers. The most powerful moment came when Elena Vasquez announced the establishment of the Henderson Vasquez Scholarship Endowment. Using life insurance money from her husband's military death benefits, she'd created a permanent fund to support children of fallen service members. "My husband died believing that his sacrifice would make the world safer for our children," she said. "Colonel Henderson taught me that the best way to honor that sacrifice is to ensure that other military families have the support they need." During the service, I noticed several familiar faces in the crowd, including Uncle Charles and Aunt Margaret, who'd maintained their distance since Robert's conviction. They stood at the edge of the gathering, clearly uncomfortable but present nonetheless. After the formal ceremony, Charles approached me hesitantly. At 64, he looked older than his years, the stress of the legal battles and family division having taken its toll. "Rebecca," he said awkwardly, "I wanted to apologize for what happened at the funeral. I was angry and confused, and I let Robert convince me that you were taking advantage of Dad." The apology felt genuine, but it came with complications. "Uncle Charles, I appreciate that, but apologies don't undo the damage. You supported Robert's attempts to discredit Grandpa's work and harass the families he helped." "I know," he said quietly. "I've been watching what you've built here, and I realize now that Dad wasn't just helping strangers. He was building something important. Something that mattered." Margaret joined us, her expression equally contrite. "We received our inheritance from Dad's estate," she said. "It wasn't much, just a few $1,000s each, but we want to donate it to the foundation." The gesture was meaningful, but it also highlighted the fundamental misunderstanding that had driven our family conflict. "This was never about money," I said. "It was about honoring his values and continuing his work." "We understand that now," Charles replied. "Too late, maybe, but we understand." Over the following months, both uncles became regular volunteers at foundation events. Their involvement was sometimes awkward. They lacked the natural connection with veterans that came from military experience, but their efforts were genuine. Margaret proved particularly effective at organizing fundraising events, bringing her social connections into contact with our mission. The most significant development came when Patricia announced her decision to retire early from her corporate job and join the foundation full-time as development director. Her business experience and professional network proved invaluable in securing major corporate sponsorships and grants. "I spent 25 years climbing the corporate ladder," she told me over dinner one evening. "I thought success meant accumulating wealth and status. Watching what you've built here has taught me that real success means making a difference in people's lives." Working alongside my mother revealed sides of her personality I'd never seen before. She threw herself into the foundation's work with the same intensity she'd once applied to her business career, but with a warmth and empathy that had been missing from our relationship for years. The congressional testimony bore fruit when the Veterans Affairs Committee passed the Henderson Foundation Act, authorizing federal funding for community-based veteran support networks modeled on our approach. The legislation included provisions for training programs, standardized protocols, and evaluation metrics to ensure quality and accountability. Senator Patricia Williams, a Navy veteran who'd championed the legislation, invited me to attend the signing ceremony at the White House. Standing in the Rose Garden as the president signed the bill into law, I thought about Bill's reaction to seeing his small-town commitment to helping fellow veterans become national policy. "Your grandfather would be proud," said Congressman Thompson, who'd attended the ceremony. "His vision is going to help veterans across the country." The federal recognition brought new opportunities and challenges. Foundations in 43 states applied for Henderson Act funding. Our training team traveled constantly, teaching other organizations how to implement community-based veteran support networks. The administrative demands were enormous, but so was the potential impact. Maria Santos proved instrumental in managing the expansion. Her law enforcement background helped her develop standardized protocols and quality control measures that ensured consistency across different locations while allowing for local adaptation. "We're not franchising the Henderson Foundation," she explained to potential partner organizations. "We're sharing a philosophy and approach that each community needs to adapt to their own circumstances." One of the most successful adaptations came from an unexpected source. The Lakota Nation in South Dakota established a Henderson Model Foundation specifically focused on Native American veterans, who faced unique challenges related to tribal sovereignty, cultural identity, and access to services on reservations. "Colonel Henderson's approach works because it respects the warrior tradition," explained Joseph Running Bear, the Lakota Foundation's director. "Native veterans understand the concept of service to the community. This model lets them continue serving even after they return from war." The international attention was equally surprising. Military attachés from Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom visited our headquarters to study our approach. Several NATO countries began pilot programs based on Henderson Foundation principles, adapting them to their own veteran populations and cultural contexts. 5 years after that confrontation at St. Michael's Cathedral, I found myself back in the same place but under dramatically different circumstances. We were dedicating a new wing of the cathedral specifically for veteran services. Counseling offices, meeting rooms, and a chapel for memorial services. Father Rodriguez, now 77 but still energetic, led the dedication ceremony. "Colonel Henderson understood that serving others is a form of worship," he said. "This new facility will ensure that his spirit of service continues to bless our community for generations to come." The event attracted over 2,000 attendees, including delegations from Henderson Foundation chapters across the country. Veterans from World War II to Afghanistan shared the same space, united by their commitment to supporting each other. During my speech, I looked out at the crowd and saw faces that represented every stage of our foundation's evolution. Sergeant Chen, now the regional coordinator for Henderson Foundation chapters in Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Elena Vasquez, whose scholarship program had grown to support over 300 military families. Detective Santos, who'd left law enforcement to become our national training director. But the face that meant the most to me was my mother's. Patricia Martinez, former corporate executive, now served as the Foundation's Chief Development Officer and had become one of our most effective advocates. The transformation in our relationship paralleled the Foundation's growth, built on shared commitment to something larger than ourselves. 5 years ago, I told the crowd, "My family tried to lock me out of my grandfather's funeral because they didn't understand his values." Today, we're gathered to celebrate those same values and their impact on thousands of lives across the country. I paused, looking toward the spot where Bill's memorial stone stood in the adjacent cemetery. Grandpa Bill always said that true service means showing up for people when they need you most. Today, we're not just honoring his memory, we're proving that his vision was right. When we serve others, we create communities that can survive any challenge. The ceremony concluded with the traditional flag presentation, but this time it was different. Instead of one flag for one family, we presented flags to representatives of all 50 state Henderson Foundation chapters, symbolizing the national network that had grown from one man's commitment to helping fellow veterans. That evening, our board of directors gathered for our annual strategic planning session. The numbers were staggering. Over 25,000 veterans directly served, more than 8,000 families assisted with housing and education, 1,200 successful job placements, and a network of volunteers exceeding 50,000 people. But the statistics, impressive as they were, only told part of the story. The real measure of our success was the transformation we'd witnessed in individuals and communities. Veterans who'd come to us broken and hopeless had become leaders and mentors. Families who'd received assistance were now providing assistance to others. Communities that had struggled to support their veteran populations had become models for the nation. "What's next?" asked Sergeant Chen during our planning discussion. It was a question I'd been pondering for months. The Henderson Foundation had achieved everything Bill could have imagined, and more. We'd proven that community-based veteran support could work at scale. We'd influenced national policy and inspired international attention. We'd created a sustainable model for service that would outlive all of us. Next, I said, we keep doing what Grandpa taught us. We show up for people who need us. We remember that service is not a destination, it's a way of life. As the meeting concluded and board members began heading home, I walked through the renovated headquarters one final time. The building that had once been Bill's modest family home was now a bustling center of activity. The living room where we'd shared Sunday coffee housed our administrative offices. His bedroom had become a counseling center. The garage where he'd taught me about car engines was now a workshop where veterans learned job skills. But Bill's presence was still everywhere, in the military memorabilia that decorated the walls, in the photographs of families we'd helped, and in the spirit of service that guided every decision we made. Standing in what had once been his kitchen, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages that had accumulated throughout the day. Thank you notes from families who'd received assistance, updates from Foundation chapters across the country, requests for help from veterans who'd heard about our work. Each message represented a life that had been touched by Bill's legacy. Each request was an opportunity to prove that his values were still alive and growing stronger every day. The last message was from an unexpected source, a young soldier stationed in Germany who'd heard about the Henderson Foundation from other service members. She was struggling with the transition to civilian life and wondering if our support network could help her find purpose after military service. I smiled as I typed my response, remembering similar conversations I'd had with Bill years earlier. The work was never finished, but every life we touched made the effort worthwhile. Outside, the lights of Millbrook twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of traffic on the highway that connected our small town to the larger world. But here on Maple Street, in the house where Bill Henderson had lived and dreamed and served others, his legacy continued to grow. The officers who'd saluted me that day at the cathedral had been right to recognize something special in that moment. They'd witnessed the birth of a movement that would touch thousands of lives and change how America cares for its veterans. And it all started with a grandfather who taught his granddaughter that true service means showing up for others, even when, especially when, your own family doesn't understand why you care so much about strangers. As I locked the headquarters and headed home, I realized that being excluded from Bill's funeral had been the greatest gift he could have given me. It had forced me to understand that his real family wasn't defined by blood, but by shared values and mutual commitment to serving others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new veterans in need of assistance, and new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, I was content knowing that Bill's legacy was secure and growing stronger every day. The man who'd been misunderstood by his own children had created a new kind of family, one bound together not by genetics, but by the unbreakable bonds of service and sacrifice. 6 months later, I received a phone call that would once again test everything we'd built. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel James Brennan, a Pentagon official I'd never met. "Ms. Martinez, I'm calling about a situation in Afghanistan. We have a group of interpreters and their families who assisted American forces during the withdrawal. They're currently in refugee camps, and the State Department is looking for organizations that can help with their resettlement." The request was daunting. These weren't American veterans. They were Afghan nationals who'd risked their lives to support our military mission. But they were also people who'd served alongside American soldiers, sharing the same dangers and displaying the same courage. "How many families are we talking about?" I asked. 43 families. About 200 people total, including elderly grandparents and young children. They need everything: housing, job training, English language education, medical care, and emotional support for trauma they've experienced. I thought about Bill's definition of service: showing up for people when they need you most, regardless of whether they look like you or share your background. These Afghan families had served America just as surely as any soldier in uniform. "We'll help," I said without hesitation. The Afghan Resettlement Project became our most challenging initiative. Unlike working with American veterans who understood our culture and systems, these families faced language barriers, cultural differences, and the trauma of having lost everything when they fled their homeland. Fatima Ahmadi, a former interpreter who'd worked with Marines in Helmand Province, became our liaison with the refugee families. She'd earned a master's degree in English literature from Kabul University before the Taliban's return forced her to abandon her teaching career and flee for her life. "In Afghanistan, I taught American literature to university students," she told me during our first meeting. "I helped them understand Hemingway and Steinbeck. Now I need help understanding how to buy groceries and register my children for school." The irony was profound. A woman who'd taught American culture to Afghan students now needed guidance navigating American bureaucracy as a refugee. But her educational background made her an ideal bridge between our foundation and the families we were trying to help. Working with the Afghan families taught us new lessons about service and sacrifice. These people had risked everything to support American soldiers, knowing that their assistance might cost them their lives if discovered by the Taliban. When Kabul fell, they'd lost their homes, their careers, their extended families, and their entire way of life. Mohammed Hassan, a former interpreter who'd worked with Army Rangers, broke down during one of our orientation sessions. "I saved American soldiers' lives by translating for them," he said through tears. "But I couldn't save my own brother when the Taliban came to our village looking for collaborators." The emotional weight of their stories challenged our volunteers in unexpected ways. Many of our veteran supporters struggled with guilt about the war's outcome and their role in encouraging Afghan cooperation that had ultimately put these families at risk. Sergeant Chen proved particularly effective at counseling both the Afghan refugees and the American veterans who were working with them. His own experience with war trauma helped him understand the complex emotions involved. "Survivor's guilt affects everyone differently," he explained during one of our volunteer training sessions. "Our veterans feel guilty that they came home safely while their interpreters faced reprisals. The interpreters feel guilty that they escaped while family members didn't. We need to help everyone process these feelings constructively." The practical challenges were enormous. Finding housing for 43 families in a competitive rental market required partnerships with landlords, property management companies, and local housing authorities. Many landlords were initially reluctant to rent to refugees, citing concerns about language barriers and cultural differences. Patricia's corporate connections proved invaluable in overcoming these obstacles. She leveraged her business relationships to secure apartment leases, often serving as a character reference for families she'd never met, but whose service she'd come to understand and respect. "These people served America just like Dad did," she told skeptical property owners. "They deserve the same respect and support we give to our military veterans." The job placement program required even more creativity. Many of the Afghan refugees had advanced degrees and professional experience, but their credentials weren't recognized in the United States. Fatima's master's degree in English literature qualified her to teach at any university in Afghanistan, but American schools required additional certification she couldn't afford to pursue. We partnered with Columbus State Community College to develop a credential recognition program that allowed refugee professionals to demonstrate their skills and knowledge while completing American certification requirements. The program became a model that other cities began replicating. Dr. Rashid Karimi, a former surgeon at Kabul's largest hospital, enrolled in the medical recertification program despite being 62 years old. "In Afghanistan, I performed surgery on American soldiers," he told me. "Now I study to pass American medical exams so I can practice medicine again. It is humbling, but necessary." The children faced their own unique challenges. Many had witnessed violence or lost family members during the Taliban's takeover. They struggled with English language learning while trying to adapt to American school systems and social norms. Amira Hassan, Mohammed's 14-year-old daughter, had been an honor student in Kabul before her family's escape. In Columbus, she struggled with both academics and social integration. "In Afghanistan, I was going to be a doctor like my uncle," she told me during one of our mentoring sessions. "Here, I feel stupid because I don't understand the teacher and the other students make fun of my accent. We developed a youth mentoring program that paired Afghan teenagers with American students from local high schools. The program helped with language learning while building cross-cultural friendships that benefited everyone involved. The most rewarding aspect of the Afghan project was watching the veteran community embrace these new families. American soldiers who'd served in Afghanistan welcomed the opportunity to reconnect with interpreters who'd saved their lives during deployment. Master Sergeant Tony Rodriguez, an Army medic who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, drove 8 hours from Detroit to attend our first Afghan-American reunion event. "Ahmad Nazir saved my life in Kandahar," he said, embracing his former interpreter with tears in his eyes. "I always wondered what happened to him after we left. Now I can finally say thank you properly." The reunion events became regular gatherings that strengthened bonds between American veterans and Afghan refugees, while helping both groups process their shared experiences of war and its aftermath. As the Afghan resettlement project gained national attention, we received requests to expand the program to other cities with large veteran populations. The model we'd developed in Columbus was being replicated in Phoenix, San Diego, Norfolk, and Fort Worth. The success of the project also attracted the attention of international humanitarian organizations. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees invited me to speak at a conference in Geneva about community-based integration models for displaced populations. Standing before delegates from dozens of countries, I shared the story of how Bill Henderson's commitment to service had evolved into a global model for supporting people displaced by conflict. "Service knows no boundaries," I told the international audience. "When we help others, regardless of their nationality or background, we honor the best values of our own countries while building bridges across cultural divides." The Geneva presentation led to consultation requests from refugee resettlement organizations in Canada, Germany, and Australia. The Henderson model was being adapted to help Syrian refugees in Toronto, Afghan families in Berlin, and Rohingya refugees in Perth. 10 years after being locked out of Bill's funeral, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought our foundation to international prominence. What had begun as one grandfather's commitment to helping fellow veterans had become a global network supporting displaced populations worldwide. The foundation now operated in all 50 states, with international partnerships on 6 continents. Our annual budget exceeded $50 million, supporting over 100,000 beneficiaries annually. But the numbers, impressive as they were, still only told part of the story. The real measure of our success was in the individual transformations we witnessed daily. Veterans who'd found purpose in helping refugees. Refugee families who'd rebuilt their lives and were now helping other newcomers. Communities that had been strengthened by embracing diversity and service. Looking back, I realized that being excluded from Bill's funeral hadn't been a tragedy. It had been the catalyst for something far more important than any family gathering. It had forced me to understand that true family isn't defined by blood relations, but by shared commitment to serving others. The officers who'd saluted me that day at the cathedral had been saluting more than military protocol. They'd been acknowledging the birth of a movement that would touch lives across the globe and redefine how communities support their most vulnerable members. And it all started with a grandfather who taught his granddaughter that service never ends. It just evolves to meet new challenges and serve new populations in need. The man who'd been misunderstood by his own children had created a new kind of family, one bound together not by genetics, but by the unbreakable bonds of service and sacrifice. And in the end, that was the greatest tribute any veteran could ask for, the knowledge that their service had inspired others to keep serving long after their own watch had ended. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.